Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. There was a survey that asked gardeners coast to coast, what are your favorite homegrown vegetables? So, naturally, we have a podcast about America's top 10 homegrown vegetables. Master gardener and vegetable expert Gail Pothour and I talk about each of those 10, along with growing advice for each one, our favorite varieties, and tips for having more backyard success with those vegetables. Actually, we got into such detail about each, we're going to have to divide this podcast chat into 2 episodes, today's and next week's Garden Basics podcast. So today we are talking tomatoes. Well, that's no surprise, really. That is America's favorite vegetable to grow, as well as cucumbers, sweet peppers, beans, and carrots. Next week, it's 5 more. It's all in today's episode 263, the top 10 homegrown vegetables, part 1. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, and we're brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. Have you ever wondered what are the top 10 garden vegetables that people grow in their backyard? Well, the National Gardening Association took a survey, and so did the Rapid City, South Dakota Journal newspaper, and together they came up with this list of the 10 most popular homegrown garden vegetables. So we're going to spend a few minutes on each talking about them and maybe give you some tips on growing the most popular ones. And if you want to be a popular gardener, these are 10 good ones to start with. Gail Pothour is with us. Gail is the Sacramento County Master Gardener, vegetable expert extraordinaire. And Gail, it's no one surprise that on the National Garden Association's list of the most popular garden vegetables, tomatoes is number 1 with something like 86% of gardeners saying that, yeah, we plant tomatoes.
It's number 1 on every list I've ever seen, any book on tomatoes I've ever read. So yes, that's probably the reason why a lot of people got into vegetable gardening was to start growing tomatoes. So yeah, I agree, number 1.
And especially with salsa overtaking ketchup as America's favorite condiment, I'm not surprised either that tomatoes are right up there at number 1 because, frankly, salsa is a lot easier to make than ketchup.
However, you can't grow your cilantro in the summer when we have tomatoes. So, yeah.
I will tell you a way on how to do it.
Oh, yeah, I would like to know because,
right.
Boy, mine suffers.
Remind me to tell you.
Okay.
Don't let me forget. All right.
Okay.
With tomatoes, let's start with the beginning gardener. If you're growing your first garden and you want tomatoes, America's most popular homegrown vegetable, well, start with something with training wheels, something that might be easy. And usually most seasoned gardeners will say, well, start with a hybrid variety. Don't start with an heirloom. Start with something easy to grow. Start with something that is going to produce a lot of fruit, like a cherry tomato, and go with the tried and true varieties for your area.
Right, especially a cherry tomato. I think they pretty much can be grown by anyone, anywhere, as long as they have some sun. They can take a little bit of shade, unlike full-size tomatoes or indeterminate tomatoes that need to have full sun, at least 6 to 8 hours. Cherries can handle a little bit of shade, and I find they don't stop producing in the middle of summer like a lot of tomatoes will if we get temperatures over 90 degrees. The cherries will continue to produce. They're easy, they're small, they're great for kids to grow.
I think the biggest mistake that beginning gardeners make when planting tomatoes is they plant too many plants and they put them too close together.
Mm-hmm. You need some air circulation to kind of avoid some of the fungal diseases. Tomatoes are a vine, and there's different classifications of tomatoes and the types of fruit and the vines. There's indeterminate, determinate, and dwarf typically. Indeterminates are long vines, and if you don't provide some kind of support, they're going to trail all over the ground. And that's when you can run into a lot of trouble with the fruit and then the foliage on the ground. You can get diseases and insects and that sort of thing. So indeterminates need to be caged or staked some way.
Exactly. Very good idea to train those tomato plants and using a stake or a cage. And you can make the cages. You can buy cages, but I got to tell you, if you're going to buy tomato cages, make sure they're a good size. They should be at least 4 feet, 5 feet tall with a diameter at the top of probably 2.5, 3 feet. That would be ideal. And that goes back to how far apart you should plant your tomatoes as well, which would be, I would plant them at least 3 feet apart, if not 4 feet apart.
Right. I have 12-foot beds, and I will get 4 in there maximum, 3 or 4. So my cages are at least 3 feet apart, or at least the plants are 3 feet apart. And when you do it in a cage, you're able to keep all that foliage inside so it doesn't sprawl all over everywhere. So I get good air circulation. I have found that the 4 or 5 foot tall tomato cages generally aren't tall enough for some of the indeterminates, so I have to put in that extra piece to make it about 6 feet tall, because they can get 6, 7 feet tall.
What are some of your favorite tomato varieties to grow?
Ooh, it's like, what's your favorite child, Well, I'm kind of the heirloom camp, so I do a lot of open pollinated or heirloom varieties, mostly for the flavor. I may not get real high yields, but some of my favorite ones that I'm growing this year, one is Brad's Atomic Grape. It's an open pollinated one that Brad Gates has developed for his wild boar farms. And it's a kind of a grape tomato, which is a cherry, but it's elongated, kind of egg-shaped sort of, and it's multicolored. I think it's kind of psychedelic looking. It's got purples and greens and red stripes and streaks all through it. It's very tasty. It's got a good hang time. I mean, you don't have to pick it right now. It'll hang on the plant a while. I've been growing that the last several years, and it's become one of my favorites.
I, too, have so many favorites. I really am hesitant to mention one or two, but
you'll leave something out,
Well, I'm going to defer to the vegetable experts at UC Davis at their Vegetable Research and Information Center, who, when recommending cherry tomatoes, they mention the cherry Grande, the sweet cherry, the sweet 100, and the red cherry. And for container varieties, as far as cherry tomatoes go, they have Patio, Toyboy, Better Bush, and Small Fry.
Yeah, I find if you're going to grow tomatoes in a container, you don't want to do an indeterminate one because you'd have to have a huge container and it would fall over, be top heavy. So look for varieties that have Patio in their name, like Patio Boy or something, or a dwarf. It's a dwarf variety. That way you don't have to grow it in such a large container, and they'll do just fine. Some of those will need to still have some kind of cage, and I find on those really short container type tomatoes, you can use the tomato cages that you find at the garden center that are cone shaped. Mm-hmm. I use those for really small tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant as well.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I call them pepper cages, as a matter of fact. Yeah,
that's mostly what I use them for. But when you asked about my favorite, one that I grew last year, I've been growing it a number of years and actually saving seed, is an heirloom. So I'm an heirloom lover. It's called Thorburns Terracotta, and it's this most amazing terracotta color. I mean, kind of orangey, olivey, honey brown, and it's amazing. The flavor's great. Had pretty good yields on it. I like Green Doctors. That's actually my favorite cherry tomato. It's a green cherry that's prolific, indeterminate, so it's a big plant. And it produces all season. I haven't had any cracking on it. And when it's ripe, and some green tomatoes are hard to tell when they're ready to pick, kind of turns yellowy. So it has a yellow cast to it. One of the hybrids that I've been growing in the last several years is Purple Boy Hybrid, and I've had really good luck with that. It's kind of a medium-sized black, they call black variety, which in the tomato world is kind of a dusky rose with purpley overtones, green shoulders. It's really good, a good producer. And then my favorite one to cook with is Goldman's Italian American. It's an heirloom from Italy, and it is large, squat, kind of pear-shaped red fruit, and has kind of pleats in it. accordion-looking pleats. It's really interesting looking. The flesh is blood red when it's ripe and really meaty, not very many seeds, so it's great for cooking.
I take it these aren't tomatoes you found down at Lowe's or Home Depot.
No. And that's one of the reasons I start all my tomatoes ahead of time, usually early February or so, for transplanting out on your birthday, Fred, April 28th, so it's coming up. And I buy seeds. So you have a whole world of varieties to grow if you have seeds as compared to what's available as plants at Garden Center.
If you're going to be heading out to the nursery to buy tomato plants to be planting during the month of May or even into June, there's a lot of good hybrids that are tried and true across the country that work really well, and that are commonly available too, like Ace, Better Boy, Early Girl, Champion. Those are just a few of the ones that are, shall we say, normal-sized tomatoes. And if you want a good-sized beefsteak tomato, Whopper is a popular one that you're going to find that gets to a good size. One of my favorite big ones, too, is Big Beef. I'm just hesitant to talk about heirlooms because all gardening is local. And if I mention my favorite beefsteak heirloom tomato as Dr. Weish's yellow, I know that somebody's going to try it and not have good luck with it. But that is.
Well, right. And I've tried Brandywine. That's probably the gold standard for heirloom tomatoes, and I can't get Brandywine to grow. I've grown a couple of other heirlooms. The names are escaping me right now. Paul Robeson, I think, is one, or Black Crim, that are supposed to be fabulous, and I got one fruit on them. So, yeah, I stick with the heirlooms that I have success with.
Well, at this rate, we'll be done with this program in 3 hours. So let's move on.
Right. Yeah, okay.
On our 10 most popular homegrown garden vegetables. Number 2, and I will tell you right off, I don't eat it, so I don't grow it. I hope you have, and you can tell us all about cucumbers.
Well, my husband won't eat them, so I grow them rarely at home. I am actually going to grow 2 of my favorites this year. One is called Green Fingers, and the other is Silver Slicer. And Silver Slicer is a white, kind of off-white cucumber that is very crisp and juicy. It's great. Green Fingers is a hybrid Persian. It's a small, like a baby cucumber, so you pick them when they're little, and it's never bitter, so it's really good. And then if I'm going to make pickles, I like to grow Alibi. That's a hybrid pickling cucumber. Cucumbers, we were not to plant them in our area probably for several more weeks. They like to have really warm soil. Probably in about a couple, 3 weeks, we should hit 70 degrees, 65 or 70 degrees for the soil, and that's when we'll plant.
Yeah, and remember, we're talking soil temperature here, and right now, even here in sunny California, even though we had one of the coldest, wettest winters ever, our soil temperatures are just starting to get into the upper 50s to low 60s, and it'll be a while before it gets into the 70s, which is prime growing conditions for those roots to really shift into high gear and start production. It could easily be June and July. Yeah,
and cucumber is something that you can plant all through the summer. They grow fairly quickly, produce quickly. So you don't have to start right at the early in May, late April, early May. Even if the soil temperature has warmed up and the nighttime temperatures are not so cold, you can start them in May, June, July, and still get a good crop. You can either direct sow cucumbers or you could do transplants. They don't like to have their roots disturbed. So what I do, because I do transplants primarily because I have critters around my yard that like to eat the seedlings when they come up. So I will start them about 3 weeks before I want to transplant them out. They grow quickly. I do seeds in a 4-inch pot and transplant them directly from that pot. Make sure they're not root bound. So if you buy a transplant at the nursery or garden center, be sure it's not root bound.
And the easiest way to do that is flip the pot over. If you see roots coming out the drain holes on that little container, put it back and go look for another one.
Yep. And cucumbers can be trained up a trellis, so you don't need to use up a lot of real estate in your garden. Grow them up a trellis, and it makes for straighter fruits, and you get better air circulation that way as well.
According to the Vegetable Research Information Center at UC Davis, some of the varieties they recommend for containers, which would indicate they have a respectful growth habit, pickle bush, potluck, bush champion, Park's bush whopper, salad bush, and space master all are rated as suitable for containers. But you're right, most cucumbers need some training if you're going to be planting them.
Mm-hmm. And they say you can plant more in a smaller space because they're not sprawling all over the ground. They still need to be spaced well enough so that you can get good air circulation, because a lot of the crops in that cucurbit family can get powdery mildew, so you want to have good air circulation.
All right. If you like cucumbers, you can plant them. They're easy to grow. And the good news, like you mentioned, is they grow easily from seed directly sown in the garden. How far apart would you space the seeds?
If I was going to train them up a trellis, I would probably grow them a couple feet apart. If you're not going to do them in a trellis, people typically do them in a hill. I have not grown them in hills, but you would plant several in a hill and then thin them to two. I would probably do them 3 or 4 feet apart. I want to get plenty of air circulation if they're sprawling, if they're not grown up.
Probably one of the biggest complaints you might hear about cucumbers is bitterness. And they experience bitterness, especially those that they've grown for fresh use or for pickling. And that's due to the formation of some compounds that impart a bitter flavor to seedlings, roots, stems, leaves, and fruit. And one of the easiest ways, according to the University of California, Davis, the easiest way to control the bitterness is basically to cut off the end and skin it, really. And that can help control the bitterness.
Yeah, and those compounds you're talking about, and I've been wanting to say this all day, are oh, no, I can't even say it. Cucurbitacins. And that's the compound that does make the fruit bitter. It's also the compound that attracts cucumber beetles. So I know that they're trying to breed cucumbers that don't have compounds in them so the cucumber beetles won't be attracted to them. But there are some varieties you can grow that are reliably not bitter. So an Armenian cucumber is one, which, by the way, is actually a melon. Lemon cucumbers and any of them that are Persian, those tend to not be bitter.
Also, avoid growing cucumbers in cool or shaded locations, and they need regular moisture, too, as well as regular fertilization. And usually, if you choose the new hybrid varieties, bitterness is much less of a problem. And again, if you do taste a bitter cucumber, try peeling away the skin and the outer flesh and removing the stem end.
Yeah, because I think that's where the bitterness tends to accumulate, or at least start, is at that stem end. So, yeah. But since I don't grow cucumbers all that often, I haven't experienced bitter cucumbers very often.
Some of the varieties that are also recommended for burpless cucumbers, if there is such a thing, Sweet Slice is recommended by UC Davis for being burpless.
My husband would appreciate that. That's why he doesn't eat them.
Interesting that they note that burpless cucumbers tend to be long and slender with a tender skin, and the bitterness associated with the burp has been removed. Other causes of bitterness in cucumbers include temperature variation of more than 20 degrees, moisture stress, and storage of cucumbers near other ripening vegetables. So it sounds like ethylene gas is an issue here.
It certainly does.
All right. I've told you about Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planters. They're sold worldwide. Smart Pots are proudly made 100% right here in the USA. They're BPA-free and lead-free, making them safe for growing vegetables and other edibles. Well, the folks at Smart Pots have added a new product to their lineup, perfect for building the healthiest soil imaginable for your garden by composting. It's the Smart Pot Compost Sack, a large 100-gallon fabric bag that's lightweight yet extremely durable and lasts for years. It can hold 12 cubic feet of pure compost. This rugged fabric is entirely porous, containing many micropores that allow for air circulation and drainage. It's easy to start a compost pile with the Smart Pot Compost Sack. Just open the sack, set it on level ground, and start adding your compostable materials, grass clippings, vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, and more, as well as fallen leaves, straw, and shredded paper. Next, place the optional cover over the sack. That's all there is to it. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. You can find the location nearest you at their website, and you can buy it online from Smart Pots. Just visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part, because on that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED, F-R-E-D. Do it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pot's lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers and their new compost sack. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. Number 3 on the National Garden Association of the 10 most popular garden vegetables, sweet peppers. And they actually broke it out from hot peppers. I find that interesting, but hot peppers is on the list too, so we will get to them a little bit later. I probably now grow more, well, I do grow more sweet peppers than I do tomato plants. Who would have thunk? It's just that there are so many different colors and tastes and aromas, and just the beauty of the sweet pepper in a salad is just so enticing. You want to try as many different varieties as possible, and they're going to change color as they grow for the most part.
Yeah, I find that I do have my favorites, but every year I try new ones. I'm looking for that perfect, big, blocky bell that has thick flesh and, like the ones you buy at the grocery store, big, blocky. And I'm still searching for that. So the ones I'm doing this year, most of them are new to me. Still a couple of tried and true favorites. But, I have a long list of my favorite sweet peppers.
Well, I tell you what, if I have a big red or early sensation left over from planting, you can have them. They are big, blocky, tasty peppers, sweet peppers. The early sensation ripens to a really nice golden yellow, and big red, just like the name implies, is big and red and blocky.
Okay. I would love to try that. Yes.
Okay, good. I'm moving plants today, too. Good.
Oh, are you? Okay. One of my favorites that had become a favorite, I grew it for the first time last year, was astonishing yield. It was called Sweet Roaster. It's a hybrid. It's a tall plant. It got about 3 feet tall. And it has elongated, like 6 to 7 inch long peppers that are a couple of inches wide. They mature from green to red. And I had to double check my notes to be sure that this was right, but I harvested 72 peppers on it.
How many?
72. I had to go back and look at my calculation. I said, that can't be right. I do a tick mark for everyone at 72. It was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Among the hybrid sweet peppers that are recommended by University of California, Davis include Gypsy, which is one of my favorites.
My favorite, too.
Yeah, I think I've planted Gypsy for the last 40 years, and it hasn't let me down yet. They also recommend, I don't know why, the Yolo Wonder and the California Wonder, which are two big, blocky sweet peppers that you'd find in a grocery store. That sort of big green, $1 each look to it. Mm-hmm. But to me, they're just kind of bland.
Yeah, I agreed. I tried them once and that's it. They were just kind of ordinary, nothing special about them. So they didn't make my list of favorites. One
of my favorite blocky, bell-shaped peppers to grow is tequila. It is just a beautiful, deep purple color with an aroma that is, I have yet to find another pepper with the aroma of tequila.
Can you still find seeds for those? I've had difficulty finding that.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems finding them. Let's see. I've been checking catalogs around, and I saw the tequila pepper in, obviously, the Totally Tomatoes catalog. Go figure.
Oh, okay. That's one that I used to grow, and I really liked it, and somehow it's dropped off my radar. When I tried finding it, I couldn't, so I didn't do an extensive search, apparently.
All right. I'm adding tequila to the Big Red and Early Sensation list for you. Then. Okay. Yeah, we're going to move out more plants. All right. This is good. Here's a planting tip that I didn't realize until this year how effective it is. And this has to do with planting tomatoes or peppers. And Don Shore of Redwood Barn Nursery shared that with us a few weeks ago. And he was saying, if you just transplant those, either the nursery bought tomatoes or peppers, but especially tomatoes, transplant them into 1 gallon containers 3 weeks or so before you plant them outdoors, they take on a vigor that will surprise you and will probably end up producing tomatoes, especially quicker than that if you planted it from a 4-inch pot. If you, because there's less stress, that if you leave that 4-inch pot or heaven forbid, a 6-pack of vegetables in those teeny tiny little containers for any length of time, they get root bound and they get stressed. As soon as you can, even if you're not thinking of planting it for a month or so, go ahead and transfer them into 1 gallon containers with some good quality potting soil. I am amazed at the size difference in the tomatoes that have been transplanted in just the last 2 weeks.
I can attest to that as well. I started some tomatoes for my niece who lives in Fresno, and they're about a month ahead of us. So I start her tomatoes early February. I start mine the end of February. So about a month difference. Hers ended up going from 4-inch pot to 1 gallon to 2 gallons.
Ooh.
And they were over 3 feet tall and stocky and gorgeous. The ones I started a month later, some of them are still in 4-inch pots. They're ready to go into bigger, but they are just stunted in comparison. I mean, they're doing well, but I mean, the size difference and the thickness of the stems is just amazing. Yeah, I agree. They need to go in bigger pots, and I will do that next year. My problem is I ran out of bigger pots.
Well, it's worth the investment, I think.
I think you're right.
And you check with your neighbors. I bet somebody's got a pile of 1 gallon containers behind their garage.
I'm sure.
More than likely. All right. But even the peppers that I transplanted from the 4-inch containers into 1 gallon containers, they're bigger and stockier as well. Not as dramatic as tomatoes, but the sweet pepper plants are much bigger as well.
Yeah. And something else I've been doing the last couple of years is following Debbie Flower's technique of germinating pepper seeds. And I've become a believer because pepper seeds typically take several weeks. I mean, they're slow to germinate, even with a heating mat. Her technique is soaking the seeds in hydrogen peroxide for 10 minutes. And I'm a believer. That's the way I'm going to be germinating them from now on. It seems to be really working. I don't know why, if it just softens the seed coat, I don't know, but it has worked for me really well.
It's worked for me as well. It's taken the germination from what used to be 3 weeks down to about a week and a half.
Right. The same here. Yes.
Another option too, in that regard too, is to germinate the pepper seeds between moist coffee filters. And as soon as they germinate, as soon as you see that little root come out, planted in a seed starting mix, and you can get plants quicker that way too.
Good idea. I haven't tried that. I will.
You have a small yard and you think you don't have the room for fruit trees? Well, maybe you better think again, because Dave Wilson Nursery wants to show you how to grow great tasting fruits like peaches, apples, pluots, and nut trees. Plus, they have potted fruits such as blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, boysenberries, figs, grapes, hops, kiwi, olives, and pomegranates. These are all plants that you can grow in small areas. You can even grow many of them in containers on patios as well. It's called backyard orchard culture, and you can get step-by-step information via the Dave Wilson YouTube videos. So where do you find those? Well, just go to davewilson.com, click on the Home Garden tab at the top of the page. Also in that Home Garden tab, you're going to find a link to their fruit and nut harvest chart. You can be picking delicious, healthy fruits from your own yard from May to December here in USDA Zone 9. And something else you're going to find in that Home Garden tab. You're going to find the closest nursery to you that carries Dave Wilson's quality fruit trees, and they're in nurseries from coast to coast. So start the backyard orchard of your dreams at davewilson.com. Going on to number 4 on the top 10 list of the home garden plants worth trying in your garden, beans. Now, originally, the National Garden Association said green beans, but I think beans in general are recommended and very tasty, too.
probably snap beans, maybe more so than dry beans or something, although I do grow dry beans as well. But if it's snap beans, the typical bean, mostly it's green beans you see in the grocery store or whatever. But there's also yellow beans that are called wax beans sometimes, and there's purple beans as well. There's some that are slender and flat. Those are the Roma type. Those are my favorite. And then there's varieties that are a bush or pole. So some will need support, a tall support, the pole especially.
Canned string beans, what are they made of?
Canned string beans?
Yes, string beans that you'd buy in a can. What kind of bean is that?
I don't know. I mean, I would assume it's I don't know.
I don't know either.
It doesn't list the variety name on the container, so I don't know.
And there is, I mean, if you went looking for string bean seeds, I'm not so sure you would find any.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, maybe they're snap bush green beans, and that would include things like contender, harvester, Roman, or tender crop. Among the snap pole green beans are Kentucky Wonder, Romano, and Scarlet Runner. And the Scarlet Runner has the attractive scarlet flowers as well.
Right. They, depending on where you live, you may not get a crop or much of a crop of beans. They dislike the hot summer that we have here in the Sacramento area. We still get flowers on them, but we don't get beans. I know down in the Bay Area or cooler summer areas, you can get beans on them, but up here it's ornamental and they're beautiful flowers.
Now, that's not to say that there aren't warm season legumes like certain bush beans that can grow here in the summertime. And some heirloom varieties. I grew one called Bingo, which was very productive.
My favorite bush is a green bean that's called Strike. I've had great luck with that. Really prolific. The plants have been pretty disease resistant. And then we do like the Romano or the Roma type that are more flat, wider and flat. And I think they're meatier. They have a little different flavor. So that's a favorite one that I'll grow. And then I like to have color in my food. So I don't do just green beans. I'll do yellow beans and purple beans as well. The yellow one, my favorite is Rock d'Or, which happens to be an heirloom. And then Purple Queen, it's gorgeous. It's this deep purple. However, when you cook it or blanch it, it turns green.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
You know, the internet knows everything. And
of course.
I quickly did a search for string beans. And it was the University of California again came up with the answer. Snap beans, also known as green or string beans. So you've got snap bush greens, the ones we mentioned, contender, harvester, Roman, and tender crop, and the snap pole green beans, the Kentucky Wonder, the Romano, and the Scarlet Runner. So there's your string beans.
You know, I think they were called string beans way back when because they had strings on them. When you would cut the stem end off, you'd have to pull that string down. And I think I have a recollection that's why they called them string beans. But now they've bred them to be more tender and not have that string. So
he was also a featured banjo player on Hee Haw.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So beans, there you go. The number 4 crop grown in home garden vegetables. And according to the National Garden Association, something like 37% of all gardeners have grown them in the past or will be growing them again. So beans are up on that list. 39%. All right. Today, April 28th, is a special day, so we have a special Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast waiting for you. April 28th is the official tomato planting day. Well, at least it is here in many areas of northern and central California, and your special day might vary as you may still be waiting for nighttime lows to be steadily over 50 degrees and soil temperatures to reach about 60 degrees. But whenever the time is right, well, happy Tomato Planting Day. So to celebrate, we talk about the hybrid and heirloom tomatoes that are worth a try in 2023, including the favorites of many tomato heads. We list easy-to-grow tomatoes, too. Plus, we have a chat with Brad Gates of Wild Boar Farms on how he is breeding the heirloom tomatoes of the future. Brad has developed several popular, tasty, and colorful open-pollinated tomato varieties, including Pink Berkeley Tie-Dye, Barry's Crazy Cherry, Brad's Atomic Grape, Solar Flare, and a lot more. For current newsletter subscribers, look for the issue entitled Happy Tomato Planting Day, but which varieties? If you're already a subscriber, it's probably in your email waiting for you now. Or you can start a subscription. It's free. Find the link to the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter in today's show notes or at Substack. And you can sign up for the newsletter link at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. Number 5. Oh boy, here we go. It's a crop that I think because it's a root crop, you can grow it just about year round, depending on your climate. Carrots. Mm-hmm.
I have actually never tried growing them in the summer here because I think we're too hot. I think the roots would be too woody. It's generally a fall crop into spring in our area. But yeah, carrots can be easy to grow. Depends on your soil. They do like to have deep, loose soil, no stones or clods in them. If you have real heavy soil, there are varieties that are shorter and can maybe a little sturdier and can tunnel right through that clay. But they typically like to have a real loose soil. And you can get that if you have a raised bed. If you're like we have clay here, I couldn't grow carrots in my ground. Can do it in a raised bed or a large container.
And you're absolutely right. If you have rocky soil too, you want to grow carrots, it might be a good idea to grow the shorter varieties like Danvers Half Long.
Mm-hmm. And like Danvers and there's a type that's called a Chantenay, and they're real blunt and sturdier. They're thicker at the top, and they can just power their way through heavy soils easier than the ones you find at the grocery store, which typically are the Imperator types. Mm-hmm. They're long and slender, and you really need to have good, loose, deep soil to grow those varieties.
Yep. Raised bed is the perfect solution for growing carrots. And here in USDA Zone 9 in California, you can plant carrots from seed, which is, I don't even know if you can. Have you ever seen carrots at a nursery as a transplant?
I have, actually. I have recently, and I was astonished because I don't know how you would transplant a carrot without getting that root to be disturbed. I mean, it could twist or it could bend, and that's what you're harvesting. And so you want good straight roots. So I don't know how you would do that.
Were they in just normal size containers, or were they in like 9-inch tall tree pots?
No, it was a 6-pack.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, my. Well, you can plant carrots from seed. That's a lot safer. And here in USDA Zone 9, you can plant them in March, April, May. And like you mentioned, the fall through winter planting season of August through December of planting carrots from seed. Debbie Flower once gave us a very good tip for planting carrot seeds. Because they're so small, they're very difficult to put them in place 1 inch apart. They tend to, because they're so small, there's a clump of them, and you need to get that thinned out so that they stand, 2 or 3 inches apart, ideally. Right. And one of her students came up with it, and they used moist chopsticks. They dipped the chopstick in water and then dipped it in a bowl of carrot seed, and then were very carefully shoving the carrot seeds off the chopstick into place in the garden a couple of inches apart. That seems to work.
I haven't heard of that. I'll have to give that a try because, carrots, the seeds are so tiny that it's almost impossible to spread them out at their ultimate thinned destination. But wow, okay, I'll have to try that. They do take a long time to germinate, I have found. I mean, it could take several weeks, even 3 or 4 weeks. So you got to keep them pretty moist. And we, at the Horticulture Center, what we typically do is put a piece of Agribon row cover over it. You could use burlap or whatever, and then soak that. And that would keep the soil moist until they start to come up. But they have a long germination period.
Another tip to help thwart that waiting period, or at least let you know that, I've planted there, I better not disturb that soil. Debbie Flower gave us this tip, is to plant radishes nearby the carrot seeds, because radishes germinate so quickly, it will let you know that there are carrots also waiting to come up in that spot. Mm-hmm. So don't go digging around there.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good tip to do. And radishes germinate so quickly, and you'll have them harvested before the carrots are even ready to thin much. So yeah, that's a good tip.
All right. We can't finish yet, though, because I got to tell you the tip for growing cilantro in the summertime.
Oh, yes.
All right. This tip came from Renee Shepard of Renee's Garden Seeds, and I was discussing this with her once, and her supplier of cilantro seeds, who does it in the Bay Area, told her that when he wants a crop of cilantro in the summertime, what he does is he grows it as microgreens. In a shady area, he will just every couple of weeks scatter seeds across a flat in some good potting soil or seed starting mix and let them grow 1 to 2 inches tall, and then harvest those microgreens, those cilantro microgreens, and use it just like regular cilantro.
Huh. And I grow microgreens all the time. It never occurred to me to do cilantro. And he does them outside.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, because they don't have time to bolt.
That's true. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to give that a try. Yes. Thank you.
Well, look where all the time went. We've only got through the first 5 of the top 10 most popular garden vegetables. So we're going to have number 6 through 10 on next week's Garden Basics podcast. So we did 1 through 5, tomatoes, cucumbers, sweet peppers, beans, and carrots. Next time around, Gail and I will get through summer squash, onions, hot peppers, lettuce, and peas. Gail Pothour, we have offered people a short, sweet education on growing home vegetables, and I hope more people try it this year.
We have, and it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Maybe you're stepping up your gardening game this year by getting a greenhouse, and that's a great idea. Greenhouses are great for starting the myriad of varieties of flowers and vegetables from seed. These are varieties you won't find as plants at your local garden center. Greenhouses can provide a home for temperamental plants. Yes, I'm looking at you, orchids. And you can extend your food gardening to a year-round adventure. But before you purchase that greenhouse, give a listen to our flashback episode of the week. It's episode 170, entitled Buying a Greenhouse. Ask yourself these questions first. It's from February of 2022. There are a lot of factors to consider that you might not realize until after you assemble your greenhouse. Ventilation needs, heating and cooling requirements, electricity and water, the width of the door, what sort of flooring to use, what about shelves, and there's a lot more. Take it from a guy who's owned several backyard greenhouses. Don't skimp on quality. Avoid bargain greenhouses. So we're talking greenhouses in this week's flashback episode. Go to your favorite podcast outlet and do a search for episode 170 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. It's entitled Buying a Greenhouse. Ask yourself these questions first. You can also find the podcast as well as a transcript at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays. Plus, the newsletter podcast that comes with the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter continues, and that will also be released on Fridays. Both are free, and they're brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net. And that's where you can also sign up for the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast. That's gardenbasics.net, or you can use the links in today's show notes. And thank you so much for listening.